3 years earlier, Henry had a horrific jousting accident. The fall nearly killed him and had left him with a deep, open wound on his leg, which was now riddled with infection and stank. Henry was no longer the great catch he once was.
Henry was 48. He was fat, he was lame, and he had a notoriously bad temper. And his wives didn't exactly have a great record when it came to staying alive. But after scouring Europe for possible brides, Cromwell settled on the small but potentially influential Duchy of Cleves in what's now northern Germany. The Duke of Cleves had a 24-year-old sister called Anne.
Cromwell believed a marriage to Anne would give England the strong ally it needed. But what Henry cared about most was how Anne looked. If Cromwell was to make a match, he needed to convince Henry that Anne was attractive. In August 1539, Cromwell wrote to Henry, singing Anne's praises. He described her as beautiful, both of face and body.
Cromwell's description aroused Henry's interest. He ordered court painter Hans Holbein to travel to Cleves to paint her portrait.
This is a copy of the painting Holbein made. The original hangs in the Louvre in Paris. Now, to the modern eye, Anne looks perfectly pleasant. There were rumours that Holbein chose to paint her from the front because she had rather a large nose. But to be honest, we have no idea how true that is, or what Henry's first reaction was when he saw this. What we do know is that this painting and the compliments passed by Cromwell to the king convinced Henry that Anne would make a fine bride. He agreed to marry her. Henry lived and breathed chivalry. Tales and games involving knights, maidens, and daring-do were incredibly popular entertainment at his court.
Henry believed if Anne was his true love, then she would see straight through his disguise, and a kiss from his lips would make her fall into his arms.
My lady.
Nine, stop!
Anne had no clue that the man who stood before her was King Henry VIII.
I have a gift from the king.
Bitte lassen Sie mich allein. Bitte.
My lady.
All the women of Henry's court would have known instantly how to react to Henry's romantic gesture. But Anne wasn't educated in this world of romance. She was a simple girl who led a relatively sheltered life in a parochial court.
Anne had failed Henry's love test, and he was furious. He instantly rejected his bride-to-be, claiming she was fat and ugly. He turned on the man he felt responsible. His close friend and advisor, Thomas Cromwell.
Find me a remedy. I don't care how you do it. By all means necessary. Stop this marriage.
It wasn't going to be easy. The contract to be married that Cromwell had arranged was a legally binding agreement. Henry's lawyer would have to use all his cunning to avoid offending Anne's brother. England didn't need any more enemies. While Cromwell plotted in private, Anne had no idea how Henry felt about her. But the king's court loved nothing more than juicy scandal, and rumours soon spread.
It wasn't long before the whole court was gossiping about the royal farce. The only person who wasn't in on the joke was Anne herself. She didn't speak a word of English, so she was spared the humiliating truth.
While many laughed, one man didn't see the funny side. Thomas Cromwell. He could find no legitimate reason to break the marriage contract. His master would have to marry Anne, like it or not. On Tuesday, January the 6th, 1540, King Henry stood in a small private chapel in Greenwich Palace, waiting to marry Anne of Cleves. To add insult to injury, his bride was 2 hours late for the ceremony.
I take thee to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward.
As Henry said his vows, his blood must have boiled.
For richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health,
But the king didn't let on.
until death do us part. And thereto I plight thee my troth.
Anne still didn't have a clue.
I, Anne, take thee, Henry, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold.
For Anne, this was a moment of great triumph. Henry may have been fat and old, but he was still one of the greatest kings in Europe. And Anne would now be queen in one of the most sophisticated courts around. A far cry from the provincial court she had left behind.
Just 6 months into his marriage to Anne, a rumour started to circulate court that Henry had recovered his vigour. But it wasn't in his wife's bed. It was in her maid's. Henry had fallen for the beautiful Catherine Howard, Anne's teenage lady-in-waiting. And now the old king was planning to make Catherine wife number 5. Henry refused to allow the farce of his marriage to continue a moment longer. Fortunately, he found a way to end it with the law rather than the sword.
When Anne of Cleves was 12, she'd been betrothed to the son of the Duke of Lorraine. Now, the wedding had never happened, and the agreement had been cancelled, but the papers proving it had gone missing. So Henry's lawyers were able to argue that his marriage to Anne was invalid, and any future children they might have would be illegitimate.
What is the meaning of this?
So far, Anne was oblivious to Henry's scheme. But that changed in July 1540.
What is this?
Anne was informed that Henry was concerned about her previous marriage contract to the son of the Duke of Lorraine. And for that reason, he intended to have their marriage annulled.
What? What contract?
Anne argued that there was no deception and that she had been free to marry Henry. But there was little she could do.
At first, Anne refused to agree to the annulment. But then Henry offered her a very attractive deal. She would stop being Henry's wife, but she would be honoured as his sister. Being the king's sister meant that she would have precedence over all the ladies of the court, except any future queen. He also gave her a lucrative sum and a clutch of houses. Importantly, this meant that Anne was spared the utter humiliation of returning home the poor, rejected wife of a king.
Anne also knew that being the king's sister was a far better fate than that which befell both Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn.